Metformin, one of the oldest drugs used for diabetes, lowers blood sugar. So does exercise, and exercise also improves your fitness and your blood pressure. Take both and you'd expect the best of both worlds. New research says maybe not. In some people, the drug meant to protect your heart may be quietly working against the exercise meant to do the same job. I'm a family doctor, and on this channel I try not to just hand out symptoms and prescriptions. I like to slow down and ask the question behind the question. And this one's a very good example. Metformin is one of the most prescribed drugs on the planet. I've prescribed it more times than I can count. And exercise is the other thing that we tell almost everyone with insulin resistance to do. So we're going to discuss now why researchers are asking whether putting those two together is actually as additive as we've always assumed, what a new meta-analysis over 800 people found, why it might matter more for your heart than your blood sugar, and what to do about it if you are on both of these. This idea started with mice 25 years ago. Two researchers wanted to know if a bit of mild exercise, swimming, could boost what metformin already does, lower glucose and with it cardiovascular risk. On their own, each treatment did that. Metformin and exercise both improved glucose control, somewhere in the 15 to 25% range. So the logical next thought was, well, to combine them and you will get more benefits. And that's definitely not a strange assumption. It's the same logic behind most combination therapy in medicine. Two mechanisms together might beat one. And for years, that's roughly what we all assumed metformin plus exercise would do. But in the last 6 years, a different group of researchers, sports medicine and exercise physiology people this time, and not diabetologists who are specialists in diabetes, started publishing work pointing to the other direction. Now, not that there is no extra benefit, but that the opposite, metformin might actually blunt some of what exercise does. That's the uncommon question worth sitting with for a second. We've assumed for 25 years that stacking these two is automatically better. What if for the outcome that actually kills people with insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, not the glucose numbers, it isn't actually any better? So here's the actual data published this year. Miquel Izquierdo and his team at the Public University of Navarra in Spain pulled together 9 studies, which totaled 800 people, mostly with some form of insulin resistance, comparing exercise plus metformin against the same exercise program with a placebo or without metformin at all. Compared with exercise alone, adding metformin was linked with a smaller improvement in VO2 max, which is the standard measure of how well your heart and lungs deliver oxygen when you're pushed to your limit. It's basically your cardiorespiratory fitness ceiling. It was also linked with less improvement in blood pressure, roughly 4 points less on the systolic number, the higher number, and 2 points less on the diastolic, or the lower number. What it didn't change was HbA1c, which is the average glucose over the last 3 months. It didn't change fasting glucose or cholesterol. So to be clear, what this is and what it's not saying is that your blood sugar control isn't the casualty in this situation. Your fitness and blood pressure gains might be casualties. To be precise, this study did not measure heart attacks or strokes. It measured VO2 max and blood pressure, which are strongly linked to those harder outcomes, but linked is not the same as proven. And that's a real distinction. If you're on metformin and you've been training for a while, tell me in the comments whether your fitness numbers have moved in the way you expected. I'm curious to know whether people are noticing this in real life or whether it's genuinely invisible unless you're in a lab. Now, why would that happen? The honest mechanistic answer is that metformin and exercise appear to switch on some of the same internal machinery, a fuel-sensing enzyme called AMPK, and a stress signaling pathway involving reactive oxygen species. Both get activated by exercise as part of how your muscles adapt. Metformin activates a lot of the same machinery all the time for a different reason. In plain English, exercise and metformin may be trying to flip the same switches at the same time, and only one of them gets to win. 2 studies make this concrete, and one of them surprised me. The Masters trial put people over 60 through 14 weeks of proper resistance training on metformin or on placebo. The placebo group built more muscle. Metformin blunted it. In the exact population we hand this drug to most. A separate trial found that metformin blocked the mitochondrial improvements that you'd normally get from aerobic training in older adults. So the drug we give people to protect their metabolism may be quietly limiting the training adaptation that protects it best. Now, before this turns you and makes you stop taking metformin, let's bring in the people who read this meta-analysis and were not fully convinced, because that skepticism is exactly the right instinct, and it's the one I want you to have watching this video too. Sherry Kohlberg, a professor of exercise science, pointed out that 800 people split across 9 small studies makes it easier to find a statistically significant difference that isn't necessarily clinically important, and that VO2 max on its own is not the same as your overall fitness or endurance. Kevin Huang, an internist, made a more practical point. Most of these trials use supervised exercise programs, and that's not what exercise looks like for most people with type 2 diabetes in a normal GP clinic, fitting a walk around work and kids. And there's a confounder worth naming. People in these studies may well have been on other drugs too, statins, beta blockers, and they can also blunt exercise responses. Untangling which drug is doing what is genuinely hard. Even Izquierdo, the lead author, agreed. When that criticism was put to him, he said to pass on his appreciation to the 2 experts whose skepticism, he said, is exactly the right kind of instinct. Now that's not a study defending itself, that's a study inviting the criticism, which if you've watched this channel before, you'll know is exactly the kind of evidence that I actually trust far more and not less. And here's why I think this deserves more than a passing mention. People on metformin for insulin resistance are often on it for decades and not for months. Nobody's chasing an A1C number for its own sake. The entire point of treating insulin resistance is to protect the heart and lung and the blood vessels over the long run. And the population taking metformin is getting older and not younger, which is exactly the group in which these 2 studies where the blunting shows up the most, and exactly the group now being talked about for a completely different reason. Metformin as a possible longevity drug. And it's unlicensed for that use, prescribed off-label and not something any guideline recommends. It's worth flagging that nobody's actually tested that longevity use population for this exercise interaction. These studies were done in people with insulin resistance and not in healthy people taking metformin purely to try and slow the aging process. But if that conversation keeps growing the way it has been, then knowing metformin might interact with the one intervention which we already know extends healthy life, being exercise, it makes it matter a great deal more. So what do you actually do with this? Whether you're a patient on metformin or a clinician prescribing it? Well, you don't stop metformin. Nobody in the research is saying that, and neither am I. Izquierdo's own advice, and I think it holds up, comes down to 3 different things. Number 1, treat exercise as the primary prescription and not the add-on. If anything, intensify it rather than assume that the drug is doing some of that work for you. Number 2, watch the 2 signals that this research affected. Fitness and blood pressure specifically. If someone's training properly and those numbers are not moving the way you'd expect, that's worth asking about and not ignoring. Number 3, where fitness or blood pressure is the actual target, higher intensity aerobic work, interval training and resistance and power work seem to hold up better than a gentle stroll. Now, none of that requires a drug change. It requires watching the right numbers instead of just the familiar ones. And the obvious caveat, if you're planning to ramp up intensity and you've got other cardiovascular risk factors, that's a conversation to have with your own doctor first. So, best of both worlds? Maybe not automatically. What the evidence actually says is closer to this. 2 good things given together don't necessarily add up the way that you would assume, and the only way to know is to watch what actually happens. In this case, your fitness and your blood pressure rather than trusting the maths because the biology sounds like it should. That's the uncommon question worth knowing and taking into your next appointment. Not am I on the right drug, but are we tracking the thing that actually matters here? If that's the kind of question you want more of, that's what this channel is for. Hit subscribe and I will see you in the next one. And if you want more interesting videos, please look at these 2 over here. This is The Accidental Doctor. Stay well, ciao for now, and I will see you very soon.